Thanks to Best Buy for sponsoring this video. So I've been doing this YouTube thing on and off for a few years now, but I've only really started taking it seriously over the past year. In that time, I've made a ton of changes to my working space. Painting, changing my lighting, testing new cameras, and just trying to stay organized, but also setting up a desk that I can use to run it all. So that means editing these videos, testing new builds, and in my little bit of downtime, playing some games. Something I haven't done yet is actually show what I use here on a daily basis and give a bit of a tour of my space. So if you're interested in seeing what I use and have a peek into my studio, then let's check it out. So I've been wanting to make some changes around here. I have a new monitor that I want to set up, which more on that later. That thing is absolutely sick, and I actually decided to go back to a darker color on my back wall, which I think I like a lot better. It's an even darker black than I had in my older videos. So before I sort out this mess and show you up here, let's take a look at my workshop downstairs. So I recently put this small workshop together in my garage. This is something that I wanted to do for a while now, to have a dedicated space for my 3D printer and laser cutter. This is where I've been working on a few of my original projects that I've been thinking up, mostly some custom niche cases that I've designed. If you haven't seen the first one, I made an all-in-one mini PC, which it's a concept that I've always wanted to have as a, little personal gaming PC in the living room. It still needs a bit of work, but it's nice to have a dedicated spot to work on them. And I can also use this area as an alternative filming spot for some of my builds. So taking a look at my main studio, I've gone through so many iterations to find the best way for me. Most of that ended up being honestly overly complicated and prone to more issues than I felt like dealing with. So I've now gone for a fairly minimal setup, which simply consists of 4 lights, a main camera, a secondary camera, and a microphone. Now for my main source, I have a giant 24x36 softbox on an aperture 100x, a simple but powerful light that has a whole range of color temperatures, and I shoot all of this with an FX3 as my main camera. I also have an FX30 as a secondary though. So usually I have the FX30 for my overheads, which I can clamp here to the ceiling mount. That keeps everything looking super clean, and I pair that up with a wide angle lens. Usually it's my G Master 20mm, which does a pretty decent job capturing my large marble table here. And then for almost everything else, I'll use this G Master 24-70. And if you care to know my audio setup, it's pretty simple, but it's not cheap. I'm using the Sennheiser MK416 microphone that I have plugged into a Zoom F3. It's a very plug-and-play situation because the F3 records in what's called 32-bit float, so you don't need to worry about gain or really anything. So behind the table, I also have this pegboard. Now, this isn't just for looks. I actually use everything on here. So the 2 black boxes on the top right are the perfect size for a micro ATX and a mini ITX motherboard. So I will take those and use them to rest the motherboard on when I'm installing my CPU and the RAM, the SSD. Then of course we have a tripod, a drill, multi-screwdriver, keyboard, mouse, which are all, self-explanatory. I also then underneath that have a pair of tube lights that I got from Nanlite. I usually use those just as an interest light in the background or sometimes to help light a scene. I've had these for around 2 years now, so it's an older model, but I absolutely love these. To the left of my filming table, I have my actual desk. So it's a smaller sit-stand desk that I put casters on so that I can easily move it around the studio. What's more interesting here though is of course what I have on top of it. The centerpiece is a 32-inch LG UltraGear dual refresh rate OLED gaming monitor. So this is a 32-inch monitor which feels perfect for a 1 monitor setup, at least for me in this small desk. I feel like I can just see everything because there's just a lot more screen to work with, especially when you drop to 100% scaling where you can still see everything at this size, which wouldn't work as well for a 27-inch monitor. The speakers are also surprisingly good as well. They come through the screen and they're way clearer and have way more bass than I would ever have expected a monitor speaker to have. A nice bonus is that it keeps my desk area clean as well, so I don't have to have room for an extra speaker. So this is an OLED screen, but it's also a matte screen, and there's been a lot of debate on the matte versus glossy for these OLED screens. Personally, almost all the screens I own now are OLED and usually glossy, except for this one, and I actually really like it. I don't think all OLEDs need to be matte, but I do appreciate the reduction in glare on this monitor, especially considering the large window I have over my left shoulder. The design is super sleek and it's understated. I also really like the thin bezels and there's no branding to be seen anywhere. But the big headlining feature of this guy is the dual resolution and frame rate modes. So you get both a 4K 240Hz mode and a 1080p 480Hz mode in one monitor. I first actually saw this dual mode display idea when I reviewed the Razer Blade 16. That was about a year ago, and I really did think it was a pretty cool concept, but that implementation required a restart every time you wanted to switch between them, which was way too cumbersome to use in my opinion. But LG took that concept and made it so much simpler with a quick toggle button on the bottom side. So with one button, you can swap between the two modes very quickly. You don't need to restart your PC or dig through any menus, which makes this much more likely to be used. Playing at 4K 240Hz is where I spend about 75% of my time, and it's pretty insane, especially if you have a PC that can drive that higher frame rate at 4K. For me, I'm running a 7950X3D and a 4090 inside this Dan C4 SFX. So I've experimented with multiple builds for my productivity builds, but I have more plans for those cases that I've used and the components that I used in those videos, which is actually the reason why I decided to go with the C4 SFX as my personal. You see, after I think it was one production batch of this first version, they just discontinued the case. The goal behind my build videos is to help others. Making videos about a case that you can't buy doesn't really seem all that valuable in my opinion. And so I'm using it as my personal because I know I won't need to take it apart for another video. As for the other things I have on my desk, I'm using a glass mouse pad, actually from Razer. I will admit I was very skeptical about these, but I actually decided to give it a try, and man, do I really like these a lot more than I was expecting to. The texture of the surface and how nicely the mouse glides across it, just all around a far more impactful purchase than I was personally expecting. On top of that, I usually use a Logitech Superlight, but more often than that, especially with this monitor, I will actually just sit back with a controller. So I've been using this Xbox Elite wireless controller, Series 2. It's the white and black, which perfectly matches the whole aesthetic here, and I am one of those people who actually use the back pedals in almost every game. I don't use all four of them, I actually just use two, one for the A and the B buttons mapped to the back, so that I don't have to take my thumbs off the sticks in most scenarios. It has adjustable hair triggers as well that I actually set to the shallowest setting, which is probably my favorite feature. So between that and the back pedals, it does make it pretty difficult to go back to a standard controller without them. The keyboard I've been using is from Mode Designs. This is their new 65 model. I absolutely love this thing. This is definitely one of the best keyboards I've owned. It has a really pleasant sound to it, and the whole feel is just really nice. The obvious downside is that there are no F keys, but that's what happens when you get this size keyboard. So I'll usually swap it out for something else when I'm coding, but if I'm writing scripts or really anything else, this is the one I reach for. Now, as small as my PC is, I wouldn't exactly consider it portable. So when I'm out for the past few weeks, I've been using this Asus G14 R9 GeForce RTX 4060 gaming laptop. This is a laptop that I've actually been wanting for a pretty long time now. I actually had the 3060 G14 that I used a couple of years ago, and I did really enjoy that, but everything that they've changed since then makes this basically my ideal laptop, at least for me. So the build quality is just so good. It's an aluminum CNC body, which of course feels absolutely solid. So there's no creaking, it doesn't feel plasticky or cheap like a lot of other gaming laptops do. The overall design is super clean and understated, nothing too flashy or having that overly gamery look. I really don't understand why some laptop manufacturers think that people want that. I mean, with the success of the G14 and the Razer laptops, I think it's a pretty clear signal that most would actually prefer an understated, clean design. But yeah, it's really lightweight and thin. It's perfect for taking around to, school or work. I'm really loving this whole package here. But what else is impressive is the performance. So the one I have here has an AMD Ryzen 9 8945HS, RTX 4060, 16 gigs of RAM, and 1 terabyte of storage. The CPU is super efficient, which is another one of the best parts of this laptop. So its efficiency plus Advanced Optimus, which if you don't know what that is, it basically switches between your dedicated GPU and your integrated GPU without sacrificing performance. It gives this thing a much better battery life, which actually lasts almost all day, at least for me. And that's not really something I've ever been able to say about a gaming laptop I've owned before. It really does make this a far more viable portable machine. But also, it's the screen. I think that's probably why I fell in love with this laptop. It's a 3K 120Hz OLED display. It's sharp, it's vibrant, it's got perfect contrast, and surprisingly bright. That's one of the downsides of OLED monitors. They're usually too dim, but Asus has this Nebula display which gets up to 500 nits, but it's also got G-Sync, so you got the variable refresh rate. Now with this, I also like to bring this mouse from Logitech. This is the Logitech G305 wireless mouse. I find it to be really comfortable. The shape of it fits my hand pretty well, and I mostly like that it's powered by a single AA battery. With everything being rechargeable over USB these days, I tend to forget to plug things in, and I just personally find it pretty convenient to just swap out the battery to have a full charge. I do have some rechargeable AA's that I'll use to swap between once the power of this included battery is drained. I do try to keep it as minimal as possible in my studio. I don't like having a lot of stuff to take care of. I find that it gets in the way of what actually matters. But with the nature of a PC building channel, I do have an inventory of parts to make all of my videos. So I'll actually keep a few of my GPUs, CPUs, fans, coolers, and things like that here in my closet, but the larger things I have go to a storage unit, which is luckily not too far from my house. The one I'm showing here doesn't actually have all of my stuff. I'm kind of in the process of moving everything from a smaller unit to this one so that I can have some better organization. So that's just a quick overview of the main things that I personally use daily. I'm sure I missed some of the things in the video, so let me know what you want to know in the comments. I appreciate you watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.